And I think that the beer industry has paved the way for that to be acceptable. Wouldn't you agree?
I do think so, and I think I didn't choose that for what we're going to do merely because beer had done it previously.
Right, I hear you.
Yeah, I've actually played around with clarifying some of the session meads, and it was very disappointing to have done it to a couple that were really great, and then I realized, oh crap, I stripped stuff out of it that I wanted. Oh yeah, that kind of sucks. So it's now I'm spending more time with them, pre-clarification, pre-packaging, and deciding, do I just need to give it a few more weeks and see if some of the stuff will clear out on its own, or do I package it as is, or is it just so cloudy that I want to clarify it because I think it's over the line. So it's not a foregone conclusion for me anymore with the session meads that I should do something for clarification. I'm actually being a little bit more mindful about what choice I'm trying to make with that, in trying to kind of walk down something that people could get with it. Like if they asked me about it, I could give them an explanation of why I chose what I chose to do, and it wouldn't seem like I was making up for the fact that I was lazy or cheap or whatever. They'd actually look at it going, oh, okay, there was an artistic reason for why. Cool. I can appreciate that. Where some people may never get with it because they have a more traditional sense, and hopefully then they'll enjoy our dessert meads, and the fact that they'll be nice and clear will be quite pleasing to them. Let's see, what else? Hydrogen sulfide. Anybody want to talk about that?
Yeah.
Icky, yucky, stinky poo.
Yeah, rotten eggs. Nasty. So...
Yes, please.
Give me more of that, sir. I was actually looking for, because I realized that I don't actually know why it is more common in cider than it is for other ferments of mine. I don't know. Do you know this, Ryan? Do you know if there's there's got to be some type of chemistry in action here? And I don't know what it is, but for anybody who's had, rotten egg smells, burnt match, some other things, hydrogen sulfide from your cider, your cyser ferments, it is very common. You're not alone.
I have had it most commonly with apple and with ginger.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking at various websites. So why does it? This is interesting. The Fermentarium, and their title is "Why Does My Cider Fermentation Smell Like Ass?" Interesting. That's catchy. That's catchy.
And descriptive.
Right. Let's see. So
I've had red currant smell like vomit before, and I've had it happen more than once. And I think it's a combination of red currant plus RC212, RC212, and that's just what it does. It goes through a barfy phase, and then it gets better.
Yep. Yeah,
I wonder. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Ryan. I'm gonna keep looking for an article in here that might give me some insight while you're talking.
Yeah, I think we all experience that, and I think also that it's not too difficult to rescue if you get on it versus letting it. If you leave it for too long, my understanding is it actually kind of chemically binds to your product, and it's kind of stuck without going to some serious intervention. One thing I've never done, although I know if I go to my handbook, the Scott's Lab handbook, it mentions some yeasts are very low H2S producers, and others have a propensity towards that. I think it'd be interesting if we could maybe somehow either go back or just keep in mind in the future to see if maybe some of the batches that do get a little bit stinky are because we're using the yeast that's kind of hardwired to, in that circumstance, to kind of get stinky, versus some that are, they say this isn't much of a producer in that regard.
Yep, that definitely could be. So this will be funny because this will bring us back to the AMMA grants. So the United States Association of Cider Makers also has a grant program, and in April of this year they gave out money for 4 grants, and the first one was an investigation into the presence of hydrogen sulfide during hard apple cider production. So we are not asking an uncommon question, and it looks like somebody wants to study it.
What's that?
Jeez, Manny, what the heck?
That wasn't me.
Wasn't me either. Yeah. So what I think it's most of the articles I said is generally it is a yeast health issue, but I'm stuck on the subject that I see it so much more readily when I ferment cider than I do any other type of fruit or meat on its own. So I suspect that the yeast, if it's truly still a yeast health issue, and that must then be because the cider, whether it's the simple sugars or whatever, are just really amping the yeast up and they're getting stressed out quicker. And that's where, as Ryan said, we can mitigate. We can add nutrients, and even when I add those on a regular schedule, I still see some amount of H2S, production through the process, but it doesn't stick. But if you don't add the nutrients, if you don't get the temperature under control, yeah, you can get it to bind really well with that solution to the point where every time you open the container, you can whip the crap out of it and to try to degas it or aerate it, and it still smells like rotten eggs.
What about using copper?
It certainly can be done. I did that back in the day before I really understood yeast health very well, and I was getting hydrogen sulfide stuck in my ciders, and I bought a couple of short copper rods from Home Depot, and I would just clean them and sanitize them, and I'd essentially just rack across them. So when I was racking this stuff, I'd I'd put the racking hose and run it right down the length of the the copper tubing, and then try to rouse those volatiles out of it, and it worked fairly well. I've played around with copper sulfate. I don't think it would be advisable for us to have a conversation about that, just because the application of that can create toxicity very, very easily, and I think it ends up being something that I don't really feel, especially if they're not that adept at fermentation and measuring and all the stuff they're doing. Just don't play around with something that can be toxic. It's a regulated additive. Wineries that need to use it actually have to register with a couple of different agencies if they're going to use it and get products tested and that kind of stuff on it. I've used it.
We don't have the facilities for using it at home and still know exactly how much we need to use.
Correct. Yep. And I've done it. And I've shared a small amount of it that I had left over with a commercial brewery that was having some sulfur issues with a cranberry fermentation. Obviously, gave the word of warning and the MSDS and all of that to the brewer, and he was able to use it successfully. But I've not used it again just because I just so worried that, I'm going to be stupidly doing it at 10 o'clock at night with a half a bottle of mead in me and mismeasure it, and I'm going to be, poisoning myself and others with it. So I've stayed away from it. But the key is that don't let it just stick around. Like if it just continues to build, you're obviously fermenting too warm. You're not giving the yeast enough nutrients, and the fermentation is just running away on you, and it's not happy. And, you got to do something, otherwise you may be stuck with a batch of rotten egg cyser.
I mean, aeration is supposed to be effective as well, right?
Yep.
Just to
splash tracking.
Yeah,
and it should. And again, if it's still very, very persistent after that, it riskier, more heavy-handed intervention may be required. But
copper sulfate,
something along those lines. Yeah, I mean, I've heard people getting copper funnels. Buying a copper funnel from whether it's a home store or a kitchen supply place or whatever, and basically again splash racking through that, and that working. I've heard people having to do it multiple times for a particularly smelly, ferment, and I think. That would be something I would recommend for people, but I would say try to get ahead of it. Make sure you're giving it nutrients. if you are fermenting it warm and it seems like it's fermenting aggressively and you need to give it nutrients, give it organic nitrogen, not inorganic. So don't give it DAP because that's only going to make it go faster.
Right.
Give it inorganic nitrogen. Go with Fermento or yeast hulls. So it gives it food, but not. Don't give it cookies and candy. Give it vegetables and a little bit of protein, and it hopefully will correct itself.
We have a comment from Twitter on H2S, and he's asking, it's Gandalf the Mead, and he says, is it because the apple ferment has more amino acid production from the yeast?
And I would say I was looking for something on the internet that would give me the ability to answer that type of question and did not find it. And I don't know if that hints at the fact that we don't actually understand it very well. The fact that the USACM provided a grant proposal to a university to study it this year would make me think that that's probably the case, is it's not well understood. And we need to study it to try to figure out, is there yet another opportunity to manipulate a cider pre-ferment during ferment to strip away the hydrogen sulfide if it's being produced, or just stop it from being produced at enough of a level to be concerned about it.
I found something on the vintnersvault.com, and I posted it up there on the chat.
That's quite an article. It's a good one.
Yeah.
And I'm going ahead and linking it on the page for the episode, too.
Absolutely.
Lalvin used to have a product called, I don't know how to pronounce it exactly, but Regules or Red List.
Yep.
And I was just looking on their website, and they don't have that anymore.
Yeah, I've seen
I'm not finding it.
I've seen it mentioned a bunch of times recently. I've never used it, so I hadn't gone and looked for it, but I've seen it mentioned enough recently that makes me think that even if they're not making it anymore, there must be some out in the marketplace because people are recommending people go find it at a brew store. But it may be the fact that we just haven't caught up and realized that they don't make it anymore.
Yeah, I'm looking in the 17 handbook, and it's not in the section where it should be because I'm extremely familiar with the 16 handbook anyway, and it's not here.
So a couple of other questions that I think would be worth addressing. One of them came from Chris in the chat having to do with the temperature range, and I think pairing this one up with that, which would be the staggered nutrient addition protocol. Like, is there anything unique about those two things for Cizer? And my general answer would be no. I would ferment in that same cool, low 60-degree range for temperature. I would also recommend the same staggered nutrient protocol with the obvious addition of what I just mentioned a few minutes ago, that if you are experiencing hydrogen sulfide and believe that nutrients may be deficient, be careful about giving it too much inorganic nitrogen because that's only going to amp the yeast up even more. And if they're stressed, that food might not work as well because it's continuing to drive their metabolism, where the organic nitrogen might be a little bit more gentle for them, a little easier for them to assimilate, and maybe gives them the opportunity to, kinetically start to slow down a little bit. So I think that would be my answer. Ryan, others, do you guys have any other thoughts on temperature and SNA for Cizer being somehow distinct than other types of mead?
Well, I don't have the answer to this, but I do wonder, what I call the real cider guys, the guys that are like anal and they don't care about mead or probably anything else, they just want to make ciders. They're happy to draw their fermentation out over months, and if their cider is even eating 2 gravity points a day, it's moving along too fast. Do you know why they have that mentality?
I don't necessarily. I will tell you that I have come across an interesting quirk having to do with cider fermentation and tax law in the United States that may partially answer this question. There is a category of cider, so we're not talking about Cizer, and this category of cider cannot have any added ingredients to it, but it is naturally fermented, and it is actually taxed at a very, very low rate. So they're in particular to allow their fermentations to progress without any intervention, because they get the benefit of this tax category where they're paying next to nothing to produce that alcohol.